Welcome back everyone, I hope you're doing well today. Today's video is going to cover some more hitting tips to add on to what we discussed earlier in the summer, and I will refresh you on anything relevant from the last video, but the fundamentals from last time will be needed to complement what I'll talk about today. So I'd recommend watching the first one first. But for today we'll get into a few physical tips and a few approach tips to round out your hitting skills. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the grip on the controller, which is actually super important, especially for timing and to avoid dropping the PCI. In the last video, I showed how I bend my right thumb a little with some tension at a 90-degree angle because it helps me press the swing button very quickly. In this game, every millisecond helps. What we didn't talk about last time is how I set up on the left stick because I didn't really have a consistent way to grip it. Since that time, I've realized that I've had the most success when I hold the left stick right by the inside of my knuckle instead of with the tip of my thumb, so it's pretty deep behind my thumb. This is the number one key I can say has stopped me from jamming or dropping the PCI. Now if you want to get even more consistent, I hold the controller with all the buttons facing my body and both of my index fingers between the L1R1 and L2R2 sticks. So I hold that controller with the buttons facing my body, holding it straight up and down instead of down parallel to the floor. This keeps my left thumb facing towards the right, otherwise I feel uncomfortable with the grip. If you have big hands, this probably won't matter, but for people with average to small hands, you want to try this for consistency as well. I used to have control freaks on the left stick, but I found that I wasn't able to react quickly enough to catch up to fastballs on Hall of Fame or higher. This left thumb grip has allowed me to achieve the same level of control in the middle of the zone as I had with the freaks, but with the added ability to react quickly to fastballs and pitches on the edges. So if you're using control freaks and still feeling like you're struggling, try this out, just get rid of them completely, try it without it, and try this left thumb stick grip. Now in the last video we talked about how the game rewards you for controlling a quadrant of the zone with the PCI. I also mentioned that I'd be looking into patterns of how there might be more to that, especially when you can slug low and away pitches and certain things that didn't exactly fit the criteria we were talking about. So a more accurate assessment might be that getting to a spot early so that your PCI isn't moving when you press the swing button will give you the best results. So this accounts for those times where you jam the PCI all the way to the edge, even when you weren't looking for a pitch and still squared it up and hit it pretty hard. Because when you jam the PCI to the edge, the PCI stops moving and you get rewarded for it. So keep in mind that controlling a quadrant is still the best way to hit since it is easier to make the small controlled movements to hit the ball. But I just wanted to clarify that the reasoning behind all this and behind getting rewarded might be a little bit different than what we said. And the reason that the engine may work this way is because in real life, hitters will often open up their hips or use certain movements to cover pitches inside, so when they get the outside pitch, they aren't able to put their best swing on it in the same motion. So good hitters will still make contact, but most often it won't be their best contact. This is also why you get punished from going high to low and get there late. Hitters will have to change their swing plane and will likely get on top of a low ball if they're looking up. But if hitters can recognize a pitch early and shift where they're looking mid-pitch, for instance keeping their hands back on a curveball, they can still do damage. That's what the hitting engine is trying to emulate with rewarding getting to a spot early. So the question is, how do we take advantage of this? In the last video I talked about how I like to visualize the ball leaving the pitcher's hand and where I want it to go off of the bat. This gives me some mental timing as well as stopping myself from rolling over on pitches when I'm being too aggressive or jamming myself when I'm being too passive. Another way that you can think about this is like you're trying to softly catch the ball with your PCI. With the thumbstick grip we talked about earlier, you can make small controlled movements with the PCI to punish pitches that are left over the fat part of the plate. And by the way, the reticle PCI really helps with this. I found myself being way too focused on the dot in the middle of the wedge PCI, so try making a switch to reticle if you can't visualize it this way. Anyway, I felt like I was being way over aggressive, thinking that I need to go attack the ball and perfectly line it up. So trying to switch it up and actually receiving the ball, you may hear people say let the ball get deep. You don't want it to get too deep onto your hands, but you do want it to travel a little bit. So that's kind of how I think about catching the ball with the PCI. And remember with these tips, you don't need to put the ball in the center of the PCI, because when you get to a spot early, you can get rewarded for average timing and average placement. But what you end up doing is getting rewarded for your at-bat quality and selectivity. There are no boosts or anything like that for swinging in certain counts, but of course you do get rewarded for swinging at mistake pitches. So swinging at pitches over the middle of the plate is your best bet. Now to round off these physical tips, here are a couple of ideas from really good players that I came across. Links to their full videos will be in the description, but I'll give a brief intro to what they said. So if you think they can be useful, definitely get the rest of the details from their videos. So Migunski has a timing technique called the click 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 method, where you basically say click at the separation of the pitcher's hands, when the front foot of the pitcher lands, and then when the ball is near the plate and it's time to swing. So the idea is that the time between each click should stay the same, so that on the third click you'll be on time for the fastball. I'm not totally sold as this always being consistent, but it's an incredibly good mechanism for anyone who feels like they struggle against fastballs. It's a really good way to stay aggressive and not start missing the pitches that you should hit. It could create a bad habit of swinging through every off speed, so as an advanced player, you might want to keep this in your back pocket just for when you need it, rather than always going to it right away. If you feel like you're in the middle innings and you're getting beat by fastballs, try using this method and see what happens. Now my other tip comes from Movie Gaming TV, who likes to start his PCI just a little bit inside, with the center of the PCI right on the border of the inside block and the middle block of the strike zone. This is a great way to cover the inside half and still be able to reach the outside. In righty-righty or lefty-lefty matchups, the inside part of the plate is closer to the pitcher's release point, so it's easier to start there and move outside than it is to start outside and move in, because the ball will get to you quicker on the inside. I think this is a great starting point or a good baseline to return to when you're not really sure what a pitcher is going to throw. I would add that sitting up and in on 2 strikes isn't a bad idea to protect against a hard fastball and track the ball to protect the plate. And in double play situations, it's a good idea to push the PCI to the bottom of the zone to avoid those double plays. And I guess we could also say that a double play is worse than a strikeout, so maybe you even want to completely sacrifice the up and in zone in a double play situation in 2 strikes, and just continue to make sure that you don't top a ball on the ground. I've noticed that's a big issue with a lot of people right now, that they get people on base but then immediately hit into a double play. So remember that with runners in scoring position and in double play situations, pitchers pitch completely different. So you want to make sure that if you got on base hitting a high fastball, you're protecting that low pitch because the pitcher probably thinks that you're not going to be able to hit it. And remember, all of this should still be blended with what we talked about last time to put together a complete at-bat game plan. Hopefully with these last 2 videos combined, you'll have all the hitting tips you need to really start climbing. But remember that not all my hitting tips are in this video, so just make sure to watch both. And again, don't forget to look at Migunski and Movie's videos. Their links are in the description, and they're way better than me at this game, so they deserve a sub if you somehow haven't found them already. The final point I want to discuss in this video is one that was pointed out in the comments of my previous video. In the background gameplay, there were a lot of instances where the ball wasn't in the quadrant I was looking for, but I still swung and sometimes still got rewarded. There are a few things I can say about this. First of all, sometimes we have lapses and bad at-bats, so a good portion of the time I was anxious and swung at something that I shouldn't have, and that's just baseball, that happens. And some of those times I still got rewarded because there's plenty of randomness in the game, and that kind of thing just happens. At the end of the day, you want the percentages to be in your favor, and that's all you can control sometimes. Now there are some times where I swing far away from what I was looking for, but it was actually a good swing and I intentionally prepared myself for it. This happens a lot when I'm covering a high and inside fastball, or ready to slap a fastball on the outside half, but end up getting an off-speed pitch or breaking ball. Because of the speed differential, I'm able to cross the strike zone with my PCI and still time up the swing. Usually if I get a fastball in a spot that I'm not looking for it, I'm not catching up unless I get lucky and jam the PCI to the edge. Now these adjustments can take a lot of practice, and you have to be comfortable recognizing the different pitches out of the hand. A monitor helps you with this for the extra frames and receiving more information, but as soon as you see some downward movement, you should be able to change up your approach mid-pitch, either by taking the pitch or staying back on the ball. Try jumping into Challenge of the Week or Custom Practice with your hands completely off the controller and just recognize and track pitches to get a feel for where certain pitches start out of the hand and where they end up. When you're in game, this ends up being very reactionary. You have to be aware of what the pitcher's throwing. If you're feeling like a guy is throwing 50% fastball, 50% slider or something like that, then there are certain times where you want to be able to cover both. So if you've practiced the ability to see both pitches, then the ability to cover both pitches will pay off eventually. So these are the tips I have for you. Some of this stuff is a little bit more advanced and hard to implement, but at least try the new grips and give them a few days to see if they make a difference for you. For most people up until the 700s, the biggest problem that they have is squaring up the baseball. So if you can stop dropping the PCI, it can help you climb extremely quick. And if you think about catching the ball with the PCI and let the ball travel, that should keep you staying right on every pitch that you can handle. Hopefully the rest of the tips give you some different approaches to stay consistent and get out of slumps. If you want to see more from me, be sure to check out my Twitch channel, Dude Food Gaming, where we stream every day at 4 p.m. Central Time. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below, and I will see you soon.